Hi, this is Meg Olson from Network, and thank you for joining us. I just want to let you know we'll begin in about 5 minutes. Thanks so much.
Touch anything, it just popped up.
Hello, this is Meg Olson from Network. We will be starting in about a minute or two, so just hold tight. Thanks so much. All right, hello. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Meg Olson, and I am the Grassroots Mobilizer Manager here at Network. And you're here today because you are going to go on a lobby visit in, next week. And you're going to get some pro tips, and then we're going to dig into the issues that you will be lobbying on. So, just so you can see, obviously I'm Meg Olson. Then you will hear from my two colleagues, Claudia Brock and Jeremiah Pennebaker from Grassroots Mobilization are going to go through how to have your successful lobby visit with a few pro tips. And then we'll hear from our government relations advocate, Trelon Shorter, about the census. And then we'll hear from Laura Peralta Schulte, our other government relations advocate here at Network, about what is happening right now with protecting dreamers. I know we're all anxious to hear about that. So, just to go over a little bit, Catherine Gillette, also on Grassroots Mobilization, is kind of helping out with your questions and the chat box. I wanted to point out we will be unmuting towards the end of this webinar because just because the numbers, this is a special webinar, so you'll be able to ask questions directly. However, if you want to write in a question during, that is fine. Catherine will be monitoring. The other thing I wanted to point out to you is on your control panel, you have a handout drop down. And there are some handouts on that that are leave behinds and our talking points that you can download now onto your computer. Those will also be emailed out to you afterwards, so don't feel like you have to do that now, but if you want to have them in front of you, later on, or just have them saved on your computer before you forget, feel free to do that during the webinar. All right. So today, as I said, we'll be discussing how to have an effective lobby meeting the moment you walk through the door to what you should do afterwards. And then Trelon will be talking about the state of the federal budget and especially funding for the census. And then Laura will be talking about the state of DACA. So we will begin with Claudia and Jeremiah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to talk really briefly about the importance of these industry visits and then go more in detail about what to expect when you're on those visits. To begin with, the real focus of doing these industry visits is to cultivate relationships both with your member of Congress and with their staff members. When you take a meeting, you'll most likely be meeting with a staff member, a member of Congress, and this is very normal and just as effective as meeting with the member of Congress themselves. This staffer is the go-between between the different district offices, between the DC offices, and it's their job to communicate what constituents say to them in these meetings. So have no fear, whatever you talk about in these meetings will definitely reach your member of Congress. These meetings are a great chance to sort of take the temperature of a member of Congress, learn about what's important to them, their priorities, their legislative goals, and then also invite them into your spaces. Maybe you work for a nonprofit, or you are involved in direct service. Wonderful to set up a site visit, invite your member of Congress or their staff to join you on your direct service work. And also a chance to engage non-traditional advocates, maybe working parents who are not able to fly to DC, maybe people who have some health issues and are not able to make that trip. So it's great to incorporate all these voices to come to these industry visits. And it's also great to think of these industry staff members as your allies. They are members of your communities. And really, this is a great back and forth opportunity, both for you to provide resources, information, and stories to them, and then for them to communicate priorities to you. So then looking at power analysis, what we mean by that is sort of evaluating certain factors that are advantageous to your member of Congress. So depending on what issue you'll be lobbying on, looking at how your member is viewing this issue or viewing this bill? Have they been supportive of certain DACA fixes in the past? If so, which ones? What sort of factors were considered in making their decisions? Obviously, very important to know the member's party, where their priorities are on that. Looking to see if they've co-sponsored a bill or were a bill sponsor themselves. Looking to see if they're a person of faith. Are you able to talk about your shared faith or look at these values or these issues from a faith perspective? That could be a great way to sort of meet on some common ground. 2018 is an election year, so looking ahead to midterms and determining if your member of Congress is up for re-election. That will certainly come into play if so. And then also looking at relevant committees. For example, if your member of Congress serves on the Judiciary Committee or the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, both those committees work on immigration legislation. So looking at sort of member of Congress's involvement in these different committee situations. When you are in your lobby visits, it's wonderful to really focus on storytelling. If you've ever seen Sister Simone speak, she loves using stories and recognizes sort of the power of the personal narrative. So unlike corporate lobbyists who are sort of just focused on data or theoreticals, you are really able to speak to where the rubber hits the road, how these policies are affecting your community, impacting people you know, and you're really, through storytelling, able to cut through sort of this data and get to the heart of the issue, which are people. Both of these issues, the census and DACA, are very personal issues and affect people very deeply. So speaking to that is very helpful to a member of Congress. They are actually hungry for these stories. You're doing them a great service by nourishing them through the stories that you've heard in your community. It also helps to make a federal issue really local. So immigration or the census are sort of these big overarching federal issues, but if you're able to speak to it from a personal or sort of community level, that's very helpful to them in sort of figuring out where their constituents are on certain issues. And lastly, we're sort of in this alternative facts era. So while, people can dispute maybe your analyses, your numbers, how you got to your facts, they cannot dispute your experiences and your stories. So great to have that really be a cornerstone of your meeting. Jeremiah will go into the more in-depth details of a lobby visit, but very briefly, if we recommend lobbying in a group, it's helpful just to sort of delegate roles within the visit, but also to be able to bring different points of view to the table. That's very helpful. We have provided you with the talking points and leave behind in this webinar, but we'll also email those out to you afterwards just in case. So make sure you bring those leave behind to the meeting with you. And you get ready for a conversation. This really is a back and forth. You'll be providing sort of your point of view, how you're seeing these policies come into play in your communities, and then the staffers will be giving you their member of Congress's priorities. So get ready for a back and forth and nothing to worry about.
Thanks, Claudia. Now we're moving on to Jeremiah, who's gonna,
Oh, and one last thing. Yes, so we have our handy lobby planning sheet, which we will send to you in a follow-up email. And this is a great resource just because it breaks down the meeting into really tangible, clear-cut steps. So if you are in a group, you can very clearly assign roles. The first page has more logistics. What are you meeting about? Who are you meeting with? And on the back, it has room for notes, and it is a great way to sort of capture the response from the member of Congress. So a great resource we'll send out to you after this webinar.
Thanks. All right, now we're moving on to Jeremiah to go through the ins and outs of the meeting.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Like she said, this is Jeremiah. Just to go through some things the general things that happen in a meeting. So when you arrive, just make sure the entire team is outside of the office at least 10 minutes before the scheduled meeting, just to get yourselves together, get those nerves, whatever may be out, and make sure that everybody is ready to go. Always make sure you silence your phone. It's always awkward when somebody's phone rings in the middle of a conversation. But yes, review everybody's roles for the meeting. Make sure you know who's going to do the introductions, who's going to be handing out business cards, who's going to be saying which point which point happens when, or saying whatever to the member and their staff. When you are introducing yourselves, use the group's name. So in this case, you will be using network, advocate teams, or however you would identify yourself. Use the staffer's name in the scheduled meeting time when you're signing in. And before you actually get into the meeting, make sure to ask the staffer how much time they have at the beginning of the meeting, just so you can kind of gauge how much time you have and how much time you should spend on each point or each issue that you would like to address. And so for the lobby meeting order, so there's going to be a brief introduction in which you'll introduce everybody around the table. Like you said, make sure that somebody knows who's going to be doing the introductions and handing out business cards. Do that quick exchange. Let your staff member or the member themselves know that you are a constituent, they're a constituent. Let them know like where you live, that you're in the community, that you're very invested in seeing the community do well. It is always good to just say something positive about the staff member. And if you can't think of anything necessarily positive, just say thank you for your service. Being a staff member, being a congressman, being a representative is a very difficult job, and it comes with a lot of pressures and a lot of stresses. And so that will always help the meeting get off to a more positive note. So next, you'll be introducing the things that you want to lobby about. Make sure that your points are very solid. Don't necessarily tiptoe around it. Say we're here to talk about making sure that there is a immigration fix. We're here to talk about DACA. We're here to talk about Dreamers, et cetera, et cetera. So and always frame it with a moral component. Say whether you may be a sister or a priest or whatever, just make sure that you have your individual frames and titles in line. When you're asking, say that your points, but also ask the member for their positions on different things, like how do you feel about DACA? How do you feel about bringing more protections for Dreamers and their families? This, like Claudia said earlier, this is supposed to be a back and forth. This is supposed to be a conversation. It's not necessarily supposed to be antagonistic or any way. Also, piggybacking off of something that she said earlier, is tell a personal story. Do you know a dreamer? Do you have somebody that you work with or you know that is dealing with some of these issues? Just anything that you could do that will bring the issue more home, bring it more like personal to the staff members, because a lot of the times they're dealing with like a lot of different data and dreamers bring in this much money, et cetera, et cetera. That is not something that we want to talk about. We want to talk about more personal stories, more people-centered language, and respond to any pushbacks or concerns depending on whichever office that you are in. Some may give you more pushback around Dreamers and DACA, some may not, but never be afraid to respond to them, and don't be afraid to say, I don't know, I don't have an answer to this at the moment. And always make sure your ask is repeated, make sure your ask is solid, and share the lead behind documents that we will be sending to you after this webinar. And also take a picture to make sure that your member is held accountable, if those staff members are held accountable. Be sure to ask during your meeting if you can sign up for a newsletter, if you can help support the member, because this, like I said, this is supposed to be a back and forth. This is supposed to be a relationship between you and the staff member. This is supposed to be something that is positive. It's not necessarily supposed to be antagonistic in any way. So sign up for the staff newsletter. How can you continue to be in contact with people? Always exchange business cards and ask the next time the member will be in town in order to talk to them about more issues and things. This is supposed to be a continuation of a relationship between you and your representative. And finally, just wanted to reiterate that we are avoiding antagonism and criticism in these meetings. Relationships aren't positive in these ways. Be polite, but also be firm about your ask and your explanations. Ask serious questions, ask questions you would like to know about, and like I said before, do not be afraid to say, I don't have this information now, but I can get back to you. I can talk to you more about that later when I know more, and make sure that the ask is clear and concise in what you're saying. too.
Yeah.
Yes. And once the meeting is over, make sure you step outside, say thank you, et cetera, and debrief with your group. So say, this is what went well, this is what we could have done better, make sure that we do this better next time, make sure that your order and everything was straight, and assign a specific person to send an email saying thank you within the next 24 hours of the meeting. And in that email, make sure you repeat the ask and you include any information that you were promised to send the staff member or the member of Congress. And also with that picture you said, use that on social media, because that will be a way to hold the Congress member accountable for saying, hey, I met with my Congress member today. He told me these things, and this is the proof that this happened. And this will continue to keep them accountable to the words that they had told you.
All right. This is just Meg, just chiming in here. Thank you, Jeremiah and Claudia. And you'll have a chance to ask Claudia and Jeremiah and all of us questions at the end of this webinar. But it's really important that you report back. Obviously, this is about a relationship between you and your member of Congress, but you are also part of a nationwide strategy, right? Everybody, I'm sure you get multiple emails from all the different groups who are working on protecting Dreamers right now. The information that you hear in your office is stuff that we're going to take back, that Laura and Sana are going to take back to their coalitions, whether it's the Justice for Immigrants or United We Dream. Everyone needs to know what you hear from your member of Congress. So you can send your notes to me at molson@networklobby.org, or you can send them through info but just make sure that you send them within a few days of us getting them. We know that especially in the House, and Laura will get into this more after recess, we need to, pivot towards the House. And so your information is just timely and crucial. You can also feel free to schedule a debrief with me, or you can also reach out to Catherine if you want to let us know just how things went. So feel free to do that too. I think now, and yeah, if you do take pictures, make sure you send them to us as well. Last year, we had a great spread from our February visits in Connection Magazine. We'll amplify your pictures through our social media too. And, especially if it's a friendlier visit, members of Congress love to see these, and they love to see them coming through networks. So that's just a nice gesture as well. And all right. So I am going to pass it over to Trelon to talk about the budget and census.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those who are on the West Coast. I am grateful to be here with you yet again, and this time there's been some developments that let's just roll right into that. So on the budget front, the Congress on Friday, after a brief shutdown that happened in our sleep while most of us were sleeping, finally reached a spending agreement that would raise the caps for over a 2-year period. And so for those of you who may recall, since year 2011 or so, we have been operating under constrained budgetary arrangements, and those budgetary caps that were set in the FY 2011 bipartisan or Budget Control Act provided guidelines for how we were to spend our funding, and so that began a whole period of sequestration that determined funding for defense and non-defense spending levels. And so it's been very difficult for Congress to operate under those restrictions, and so what they typically have been doing every 2 years or so have been working to raise the spending caps. And so things were stalled, and on February 9th, both chambers agreed to raise the spending caps by about $320 billion or so. That agreement made way for a fifth short-term spending resolution that will fund the government until March 23rd, and giving appropriations staff and members several weeks to write what we refer to in Washington as an omnibus spending bill or a consolidated appropriations bill that includes funding for all 13 or 12 appropriations subcommittees. We were delighted that in the budget agreement that they reached this past Friday was $182 million increase for the census, and we'll talk a little further about sort of what that looks like and what that means. And so as the budget process moves along, yesterday the president, in the midst of all of this sort of chaos, the president released his $1.1 trillion spending bill blueprint that provides guidance or an overview, detailed overview of what the president wants to have funded and wants to have cut. So we'll talk a little bit about sort of what that looks like and what that means for the programs that we're most concerned about this year. And as I said, we are put in a very unusual place because we are going to ask you to bifurcate your ask this year and to do an ask for FY 2018 at the same time making an ask for 2019. And so with that, we're going to talk a little bit about sort of the overview of sort of what our fundings were in a very simplistic way. We were asking for increased funding. We were asking for increased funding for housing and an assortment of housing programs. We were asking for no money to support detention or deportation efforts, and we were asking for no money to build a border wall. In the next slide, you'll see sort of how we did. I didn't want to complicate it for you, but I did want you to see the evolution of the spending request and sort of what we thought was good and what we thought was bad. And so, so the green is the good stuff. And so we're happy to see that there was some good stuff there for the census, and we're still assessing the numbers, and the administration has since released today an addendum to their FY19 request that will show an increase of $157 million for the census, and that's not reflected in our green, but we're starting in a good place of green. And so just to walk you through it, we began the year for FY18. That for you all new to the party that happened in May. So in May of 2017, we received final numbers for FY17, and then the president later that month issued his FY18 budget, at which he had requested for Census Bureau activities almost $1.5 billion for census. And then the House and Senate came back and said the House typically, since it is Republican, they typically have been following the president in his request. But the House actually came back and said, we want a little less for census. The Senate came back and said, actually, we want more. And so, and then what happened in the continuing resolution is, I think this really shows where the advocacy really worked in our favor. We had faith community groups advocating for increased funding for census. We were part of secular coalitions that were similarly advocating. And so what ended up happening was a baseline of $182 million increase that brings the total right now up to roughly 1.6 billion. And like I said, that doesn't even include the added money that the administration just sent out of $157 million increase. And so that puts us in a good place, because for those of you who are aware, and we're going to talk a little bit about this in our in the presentation, is this is an important year, 2018, because we're moving toward a ramp up for the greater funding needed for 2019. And so as we approach 2020, which is the year of the next census. So because more money is sort of needed to aid with the mobilization, the outreach, the advertising, the staffing, this administration requested $3.8 billion. Now, again, we're still assessing the actual need, but we are very happy with sort of what the administration has asked. And so when you go to your meetings, we are really going to focus you on FY18 on census and a specific numeric request for the FY18 census, which I have here at $1.848 billion. So I just want to walk you through like the evolution of the numbers, and then I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about the Homeland Security numbers, because we are going to later talk about that in some of this when we talk about DACA later on in our presentation from Laura. So on the Homeland Security front, we were concerned really about sort of three components. We were concerned about detention, deportation, and construction of a border wall. And so there's some red here that we're very concerned about. The president in his FY18 request had asked for a little over 51,000 beds for detention, and then he also asked for about 1,000 in border agents to aid with deportation. And so the House came back and said, we want 40. They wanted more than what. They wanted less than the president, so we were happy there. And then the Senate came back and said, we actually are fine with the status quo. We're fine with FY 2017 numbers of 30,000. And so we didn't see, we're still assessing the continuing resolution, but as of now, we don't see any funding for deportation and detention efforts in this continuing resolution. And we also do not see funding for the border wall in the continuing resolution at this time. Now, again, the president just submitted an addendum, and so we've got to go through that just to see whether or not they added funding for border wall there. But the president's FY 2019 request, he does ask for at least a baseline of $1.6 billion. And again, Network is asking for no more money. Now, we are concerned and deeply concerned about the numbers because the president has floated around a proposal that Laura will talk about, and so in terms of what a DACA immigration fix should look like, and there's been talk about funding for a wall. So that's going to be, so for those of you who have $25 billion in your head, that is going to come up later in our conversation. So let's spend a little time working through our census ask. And so we're going to talk to you about a little bit about the background of the census. So why did Network prioritize the census this year? So the census, for those of you who are just need a little refresher, is that it is a constitutionally mandated requirement. Article 1, Section 2 of our Constitution requires that there be counting to determine representation and congressional apportionment. So that's, quite simply, it's just to determine how many seats are going to be in Congress and what is the state makeup of your House of Representatives. And the Senate, as we know, those seats are always set as 2 members of the Senate, and that number will never change. The other concern and why we're so deeply concerned about census is around the amount of funding that comes from that. And so you've got a gamut of organizations, governmental entities, outside organizations or non-governmental organizations, churches even, businesses that all rely on census data to help determine where they're going to put their next business, where they're going to put their church, how much funding goes towards federal programs. And if you look closely at the list below, we just enumerate a few of the programs that network advocates on, and because these are the ones that receive census funding. So you've got Medicaid and SCHIP, or the state children's health insurance program. Healthcare programs rely on census data. Housing, women, infant, and children, and it helps with disaster assistance and with civil rights enforcement. So all these issues are important to us. And from our faith perspective, we know that even Jesus was born, and as his parents were making their way back to their home so that they could be a part of the census. And so for Christians, we know the importance of the census and how it is a part of our faith background in ensuring that everybody is counted. And so we are deeply concerned that the funding we're deeply concerned that the funding has been inadequate up until very recently. And so we want to make sure that the federal government is doing all it can to ensure that people, particularly children that are in hard to count places, immigrant populations that are oftentimes undercounted, are counted accurately. There is a push here. For a little background, the administration has sent out a request through the Department of Justice to the Commerce Department, which has jurisdiction over the Census Bureau, requesting that there be a citizenship question added to the set of 10 questions that Americans and folks living in our country have to answer. And so we're not supporting that effort. We're very much opposed to that approach. We believe that asking someone whether or not they're a citizen of this country will only work to prevent people from freely and accurately answering the census. And so we think that is not the way to go. There are other mechanisms for making that assessment, and but we don't believe that adding it to the census is the right approach. We have concerns in terms of that on whether or not the census will be administered in a manner that will yield the highest amount of participation, and really what is leading to that concern is that there's no leadership at the Census Department. So the president. So there's some good news and bad news on that front. So the president, in June, just a little backstory for you. In June, the Obama holdover retired and left the census, and then in November, the administration put forth a candidate who is sort of anti-democracy.
Maybe not surprising.
And so that's not the best candidate to be the census. And we got some good news for your ears only that candidate has withdrawn his name for consideration for the Census Bureau. But that still leaves us in a position where we're without the right kind of leadership. But we do applaud the Commerce Secretary Ross for his leadership, because he was formerly a census enumerator, and I think he has done a decent job going to bat for more funding for the census. And before we advance to the slide on ask, I just want you to be aware, the time is counting down. The clock is counting down, and the census will be April 1, 2020. So I hope that provides you with some background. Now let's sort of walk through the asks. So we have about 3 asks for you. We hope that we didn't want to burden you, but I think it's important for you to know that that the census, it's critical that we sustain these funding increases. And what we're going to ask Congress for FY18, and as Jeremiah and Claudia told you, it's important to say thank you. So we're going to go in your meetings and you're going to say, thank you so much for the 1.65 proposed increase for the census. But we need you to come with a bit of a higher number, and that ask is 1.848. And so we're going to applaud them for coming up to 1.652, but that's inadequate. We need 1.848, which is, I guess, about, it's less than $300 million of an increase from what currently is on the table. We're going to ask you to ask your members of Congress or their staff to oppose that citizenship question. The goal for the census is to ultimately count everybody, and this question serves as a deterrent for those who are already reluctant to speak to government entities because they're fearing whether or not they're going to be deported, or a loved one who's undocumented who could be deported. And so in the end, that works against all of our efforts in making sure that we have the highest count and that resources are given to the places that need them the most. And finally, our final ask for you is to ask your members of Congress for FY 2019 that, again, we thank them for the president's, we thank the president for his $3.8 billion request for funding. We know that the Congress ultimately determines what the final number will be. However, we believe that a little more funding is going to be needed to support partnership staff and advertising in local areas. And that really gets to the need for the outreach activities that are going to happen. I think what makes this census so significantly different than the last census is that there's going to be a heavy reliance on technology, from drones to mobile phones to and there'll still be a need for people to support this, but even the technological updates internally around payroll, all these things are important, and it's important to be efficient. And so we believe that it's important to highlight the need for funding to support that effort through partnership staff and outreach. And then I just want to highlight before we move on to our next subject matter that if you're living in Alaska, Ohio, Pennsylvania, or West Virginia, particularly Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, you're significant because your state is projected to lose people. So that's important that you get all your money. So we'll have time for questions, and we're going to move on.
Yep. Thank you, Trillon. Lots to think about with the census. I know we have a few questions that people have already asked. I'm going to pass it over to Laura Peralta to talk about protecting dreamers and DACA.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I know that for many of you, you received the briefing, was it only last week? So there has been some action, but let me start from the beginning, and we will move it forward. So as folks may know, we have a deadline that's coming up, which is March 5th, which is the time period that the DACA program is going to be eliminated. Trillon reminds me in a tweet this morning from President Trump that he has reaffirmed that he is not looking to move that timeline, that they are looking to pull the program by March 5th. So that is a real deadline, and we need to treat that as a real deadline. In terms of the program, being terminated, I just want to make sure that folks recognize that individual DACA recipients have a grant of protection for specific periods. So termination of the program does not mean that DACA recipients lose that protection. But as you can see from numbers, there are a lot of young folks who have, for various reasons, already begun losing their protection. It is estimated that 122 DACA recipients are losing currently protection every day. And those numbers really ballooned post March 5th with an estimated 1,400 young folks losing their protection a day. And I don't think I need to remind folks on this phone call, but we know that these are DACA recipients are individuals who have lived in the United States for a very significant period of time. They are working, they are in school. So this is really a crisis point right now. We are beginning Senate debate today on this issue with the hope of trying to get a bill concluded by the end of the week. So this is I told Meg this morning we could not have picked a better day to have a conversation. As it stands right now, we are expecting, if we're at 2:15 was the start time for discussions. So some of us are monitoring that right now. We had heard that the first bill up on the floor was an anti-sanctuary city bill that Leader McConnell was putting on the floor. That is a very cynical way to approach conversation where we are hoping to provide protections for dreamers, but we are in a very hyper-political situation right now. Network and others are ready for this action, and we are going to be calling on you, frankly, tonight, tomorrow, Thursday. We're going to need your phone calls. We're going to need your assistance.
Can I just jump in for a moment? For those of you who want the up-to-the-minute action alerts, which I hope everyone on this phone does, you can text DACA to 877-877. Once more, that's DACA to 877-877. And that's really for this week to keep up to date with Senate action.
That's perfect. In terms of the procedures in the Senate, Mr. McConnell is set it up so that we are having an open amendment process. You should know that members in both parties are working behind the scene to try to come up with some kind of solution. And again, it is our hope that the Senate can conclude work this week and that your visits will take place next week, setting us up for some good action in the House. Our ask is very clear. We are looking for narrow, bipartisan, compassionate solutions for dreamers that provides a pathway to citizenship. Let me give you the bright lines of where we are at politically. This is really a discussion between members, both Democrats and Republicans, who are looking to come up with a bipartisan solution versus hardliners. The folks seeking a narrow solution to DACA, both Democrats and Republicans, are really predominantly looking at something like the DREAM Act or other acts that provide a pathway to citizenship for up to 1.8 million folks. I'm sorry, I got the B mixed up with the M. And perhaps some limited border spending. It's pretty clear that the Republicans and even some of the Democrats up in 2018, security is an issue for them. But the idea of something narrow. Mr. Trump and both Majority Leader McConnell and, frankly, our favorite Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, are those looking for very massive changes to our system, really on the backs of DACA recipients. So for us, we are fixed DACA now. You know, if we want to do broad immigration reform, we've done that already when we were years ago with 744. This is not the time. We've got a deadline. Let's get this thing done. Just some bright lines to look at in terms of areas that are of significant concern, and Trelon really alluded to those earlier in her presentation on immigration enforcement spending. For me, when I look at the numbers that she presented, I see that as a big win, frankly, because at the beginning of the year, as you can tell from Trelon's notes, we were looking at a huge increase in enforcement and detention and a huge border wall. So let's pray to God that we are able to kind of fight back on that funding. I think the most immediate risk is with respect to families and family reunification. For people of faith, we know that families should be together, and there are some significant provisions promoted both by the administration and by the hardliners on the Hill that would really remake the family visa system. We are 100% opposed to that. There are also proposals that would significantly cut back legal immigration. We are significantly opposed to that. Finally, there are provisions that would undermine frankly, our international obligations and our moral obligation to take care of unaccompanied minors crossing the border from places of harm and risk. So again, those are the kind of proposals that we are arguing very vehemently, both to the House and the Senate, that is unacceptable. So in a nutshell, again, let me just restate our ask. We are looking for a bipartisan solution to DACA that includes a pathway to citizenship, not something else, but a pathway to citizenship without a high cost to families. And with that, I'll leave it to you, Meg.
Great. Thanks so much, Laura. We have a nice amount of time here for people to ask questions. When you do ask questions, I'm just going to be unmuting folks. So I'm unmuting people right now, and you can also try *6ing yourself if you are on a phone. Oh dear.
Can they hit start?
Okay. You can try hitting *6 to unmute yourself if you're on the phone, or if you realize you're having a problem, you can also just type in, because Catherine is here, monitoring the questions, and we've already had a few. I also just want to remind you that that you can. I also just want to remind you that we are going to be emailing you out the leave behinds and the talking points, the internal document, as well as the lobby planning sheet. And we'll even put in that DACA number for you so you can get up-to-date things this week on the Senate. So I am going to begin with a question that somebody typed in during the webinar. So Trelon, how did we get to that $1.8 billion, $24 billion for the census funding?
Yeah, so we've been working very closely with an organization called Census Project, which is supported by the Leadership Conference on Human and Civil Rights. And so they've been helping us shape our ask. And so they're a secular social justice organization. And what we have discovered while working with them is that I think the biggest concern has been around, I think, two things: inflation, and then also the need to address the need for the technological the components of this. And back when the Secretary Ross testified in October before the House, there was a recognition that because in FY 2017, there really was not an increase for census funding. Testing had been halted in areas like Puerto Rico, I believe in South Dakota, which in Puerto Rico, you're talking about an area that is heavily reliant on, people there are heavily reliant on Spanish-assisted technology to assist. In areas like South Dakota, you're talking about hard-to-count populations of Native American people. And so the lull in Congress in terms of increased appropriations over the years has sort of caught up to us as we approach 2020. And so when Secretary Ross testified, he acknowledged that and the need for the technology, which is a cost, to help support the technological needs, as well as the in testing that's necessary to sort of like your dress rehearsal to run these tests before April 1st, 2020. So I hope that provides you with a bit of understanding around the justification for why we're asking for more than 1.65. The ask is 1.848 billion.
Great. All right. Other questions? And if you have a question, just unmute yourself, please, and by hitting *6. And just tell us your name, please, before you ask your question. Do you have other questions?
This is Carol D'Angelo.
Hi, Carol.
I can't think of any specific question offhand because I certainly have to take the handouts and really think about it. But I want to just say it was an excellent webinar. The handouts are very appreciative. The slides that you showed us and making very concise what's happening, especially since things change from moment to moment. So I really appreciate it and hope that we'll be able to present ourselves before Engel and our other legislators. Yes.
Yes. Oh, thanks so much, Carol. Yeah. Yes, and I think I'm really I think our talking points are very thorough, and especially why we just want to address dreamers right now. And wait, some people were asking me last night, like, why aren't we pushing for more family reunification? And I'm like, we don't even want to open that. We don't want to open that box right now. We just want to focus on these young people, the 1.8 million dreamers, for now with this March 5th deadline, and then we can start talking other areas. So that's really our approach. Any other questions?
And while Meg, this is Trelon Shorter, who's the government affairs person working on census. For those of you who have concerns about the source for the number we came up with, 1.848, if by any means you're asked for a deeper assessment of that number, you can just refer them back to me, and I'd be happy. Provide me with you can always email me your experience and indicate on the report back form that more information is needed, and then I can follow up, or Laura and I can follow up with the staffer to dive deeper.
Great, thanks. All right, so I have a question here about the handouts. So as we said, there are two different ones. The one that's branded with the network blue and orange is the Leave Behind. That can definitely go into the hands of your member of Congress and their staffers. That also, just one recommendation is you can also have it electronically from us, and so you can email that a couple of days before. The staffer really likes to have that just so they can look over it. The talking points are more of a private document. you definitely want to share that with everyone in your group. Yeah, you would not hand those to a member of Congress. But anyone, who's coming with you on a lobby visit, or if you have, these talking points can be used if people want to email their member of Congress, if they want to write a letter to the editor, to their paper, if you can't make a visit. So, yes, this is definitely for folks who you want to share the talking points with folks who share our values. Think of it that way. So I hope that that's clear. Any other questions? I am not hearing any. And as Carol said, she might have some questions after she looks at the leave behinds and stuff. So feel free to, you can email me at molson@networklobby.org, and I will get, whatever kind of question you have, we'll make sure. Oh, we have one more from Forrest. Hi, Forrest. With the fast-moving discussions, will there be a way for us to know how to advocate this week? Are we? Yes, with the Senate, with their debate that's happening, and we know that, right, Laura? We want McConnell thinks he'll have something by Friday.
Well, that is the problem is if they do not have something on Friday, there is really different minds up there about whether they even move forward with trying to fix it. So the prayer is that there is a bipartisan conversation and a bipartisan meeting of the minds on a narrow bipartisan bill that provides a pathway to citizenship. Yes, there are ways that you can engage this week. Meg already gave you the DACA phone number.
I'll say it one more time. You'll get, if you're signed up for action alerts through Network, you'll get these in your email. We have, I think, 8,000 people right now who get texts from us, though, and some people really prefer that. It pops up on your phone, you just click, and bam, it makes the phone call. So it pops up on your phone, really easily without you having to sift through your emails. So that text, again, you're texting the word DACA, 877-877.
I think also our staff is writing daily updates on the status. So if you are curious about where things stand right now, we just gave what we think is happening today. We will amend that to keep folks up to date. So just check our website for that on our immigration page. Also, tomorrow, as you all know, is the beginning of Lent, and we do intend to have a call-in on this issue tomorrow. So I hope you're signed up for Lent. And as part of that, you will also be calling for DREAM. If I can just reiterate one point that you made earlier, your touches on these issues are so fundamental in the process of what we do as we touch members on the Hill. Their first question to us is always, who are you representing and who is in my district? So really great gratitude for your leadership on being on this call today and on your willingness to touch base. I do want to, Jeremiah, you had said and had lifted up the need to get back to us in terms of on the information you learn. It is really critical so that we can go do work up here and, as importantly, share with our friends so we can plot a strategy. So thank you so much for being here.
Just want to acknowledge Claire. I saw that your hand is raised so patiently. Do you have a question, Claire Broom?
Yes, I wanted to congratulate you for pointing out the inappropriateness of adding a question on citizenship to the census. And specifically, in my professional background, I was involved with some question development for surveys like the census. And you're totally correct that adding questions is the result of usually months to years of formative research to be sure you're not creating bias or introducing an untested question. So in addition to political inappropriateness of the question, it's simply technically inappropriate to add a question of that complexity at this point.
Claire, thank you so much for that insight. That's a wonderful thing to share with your members of Congress. And I can see our lobbyists around the room are all frantically writing down your name because they want to continue this conversation with you. So we might be reaching out to you soon. And Conchetta, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Conchetta Smart. I think this is a common question we get from networkers, our members and our activists. Your rep and senator are on board. Congratulations. I see you're from Illinois, so of course Dick Durbin is really on board with all of this. You should probably not visit someone if you're not a constituent. You might, this week especially, when they're on recess, like if they have time for people, it's not going to be constituents. It is still really important to make that touch. You can ask their office to thank them so greatly for their work, and also to ask that question of how can we be of help? How can we get the word out? And I know that's especially on immigration. I have to let you know, the census is kind of the great secret that like Catholic social teaching, the census is a great secret that nobody knows about. We had members in Virginia meet with Tim Kaine's office earlier this year, and the staffers knew nothing very little to nothing about the census, and really got the senator on board to think about what it would mean if, especially like people of color in Richmond and you know, people living in the hollers of Southern Virginia, if they weren't counted, what would that mean for the state? So you can definitely still go in with that education, really important.
And this is Trelawn. I'd like to add to that, particularly for the person who asked about how to engage Dick Durbin because he's such a champion on our issues. I think it's on the census front. It's incredibly important to urge his office's support because they've been so focused on leading behind the scenes discussions around DACA and immigration. We don't want them to lose sight that Illinois is one of 7 states that's projected to lose a seat. So it's critical for him and for Tammy Duckworth as well to be really sort of engaged and not taking their eyes off the prize here, and that because the unintended consequence of fighting so hard for DACA, fighting so hard for DREAM, and not fighting equally as hard for census in a state like Illinois is you're gonna lose funding. They're gonna lose. You know, the state is made up of so many great advocates. We don't want to lose one either. And so we want to make sure that they are really not forgetting that their help on an issue that isn't sort of top of mind, but ought to be, we need to just keep them focused on that.
All right, so it's past 3 o'clock hour at this point. I want to thank everyone for sticking with us, asking great questions. The questions can still continue. Just feel free to email me, and I will field them to the correct people. And you will get a recording of this tomorrow. And then we will also, right after this email, right after this webinar, Claudia is going to email you out all the documents you need. And yeah, just please, please, please remember to report back on how your meeting went. And if you have pictures, send them our way because we love to see our members in action. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yes. A license, is that enough?
That's enough.
You don't want, well, I have my SEPTA. If
Well,
they want
I
to